front door of my childhood home was unlocked. I know that sounds like a small thing, but I'd been gone for 7 months. 7 months on a research vessel in the Bering Sea. No cell service. No internet except for the 30-minute satellite window on Thursdays. And the first thing I noticed when the cab pulled up wasn't the freshly pressure-washed driveway or the new mailbox post. It was that the door was open. Wide open. On a Tuesday morning in February in Columbus, Ohio, my name is Simone and I'm 32 years old. I'm a marine biologist. I've spent more time on ships than in apartments, more nights in a sleeping bag bolted to a bunk than in any bed I could call mine. Which is exactly why, 6 years ago, when I finally saved enough to buy a house, I didn't buy something flashy. I bought a small brick 2-story on Cleburne Avenue with a cracked back patio and a kitchen that smelled permanently like someone's grandmother. I bought it because it was mine, and because in my line of work, having one fixed point on Earth, something that doesn't pitch and roll, matters more than I can explain. I paid for it with 3 years of hazard pay, research grants, and by eating rice and canned sardines for longer than I'll admit to anyone. I refinished the floors myself over one Thanksgiving weekend on my hands and knees with a rented sander, listening to true crime podcasts until I could recite them from memory. I painted every room. I fixed the porch light. I planted a hydrangea bush along the side fence that I was irrationally proud of. That house was the only place on Earth where I didn't have to justify my existence. So when the cab pulled away and I walked up the front path with my duffel over my shoulder, still wearing clothes that smelled faintly of salt water and diesel, and I saw the door hanging open, I stopped. There was a box on the porch, one of those brown paper moving boxes, flaps folded open, with what I recognized immediately as my grandmother's quilt spilling over the side. My grandmother's quilt. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing. In my field, we learn not to react to data before we understand it. You see something unexpected. You gather more information before you move. I picked up the quilt, folded it over my arm, and walked inside. My sister was standing in my kitchen. She wasn't alone. My mother was at the table, and a man I didn't recognize, early 50s, fleece vest, the particular energy of someone who charges by the hour, was taking photographs of my built-in bookshelves with a professional camera. My sister's name is Audrey. She's 4 years older than me, and she has always had this specific talent of standing in a room like she built it herself. She turned when she heard me come in, and her face did something I still think about. It didn't go guilty. It went annoyed, like I was the one who'd shown up at the wrong time. "You're early," she said. I set my duffel down on the floor. I set the quilt down on top of it. "My contract ended ahead of schedule," I said. "Whose boxes are on my porch?" My mother looked up from the table. She had the expression she used to wear when I was 12 and asked inconvenient questions at dinner, a sort of preemptive exhaustion, like she was already tired of how this conversation was going to go. "Simone," she said, "sit down. I'd rather stand. Who is this man, and why is he photographing my house?" The man with the camera lowered it and extended his hand. "I'm a real estate photographer. I'm here for the listing." "The listing." I turned to Audrey. She crossed her arms, and I watched her make the decision to go on offense instead of apologizing, a move I'd seen her execute 100 times on our parents, on teachers, on anyone who questioned her. "Before you make this into a whole thing," she said, "just hear us out. Mom needed the money. You're never here anyway. You live on a boat, Simone. You've been living on a boat for 7 months. What exactly are you using this house for?" "I own this house. You signed a power of attorney before you left," my mother said. "For emergencies." I looked at her. I remembered the night I signed it, sitting at the same kitchen table, my deployment paperwork spread out in front of me, going through the checklist my department had gave all researchers before long, offshore assignments. POA for financial and property decisions. Standard procedure when you're unreachable for months at a time. I'd handed it to my mother because she was the only person in my family I thought I could trust. "That was for emergencies," I said. "Medical decisions. Paying a bill if something lapsed." "The mortgage was going to lapse," my mother said. "No, it wasn't. I set up autopay before I left. I showed you the confirmation." Silence. "Audrey needed money," my mother said. and her voice shifted into the registers she'd used my entire childhood to explain why Audrey's needs were actually everyone's needs. Audrey's rent. Audrey's Audrey's credit card. Audrey's credit card. Audrey's boyfriend's legal fees, always delivered with that same tone, like it was simply a fact of nature, like gravity, like weather. She was drowning. She asked me for help, and I didn't have anything. And you had this house just sitting here? I was 7 months away from coming home, I said. 7 months. The buyer's coming at 11, Audrey said. She checked her phone with a boredom that made me want to put my fist through something. We've already signed the initial documents. She's doing a final walkthrough before the wire clears. It's a cash deal, so it moves fast. We're getting $410,000 and we needed it. I'm sorry you feel that way, but it's done. It's done. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happened next is the part nobody expected. Not them, not the buyer, and honestly not even me, even though I was the one who had prepared for it. I didn't lose my composure. I want to be clear about that because everything that came after depended on me not losing it in that moment. The photographer was still in the room. My mother was watching me with that preemptive exhaustion. Audrey was already typing something on her phone, dismissing me before I'd even responded. I picked up my duffel. I picked up my grandmother's quilt. I said very calmly, "When does the buyer arrive?" 11, Audrey said without looking up. Then I'll be back before 11. I walked out. I got back in a cab. I went to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and I sat down and I took 3 slow breaths and I thought very carefully about what I knew. What I knew was this: 8 days before I boarded that research vessel. 8 days. Which is how far in advance I plan things when my job involves being unreachable for months in an international maritime zone. I had sat in the office of an estate attorney named Patricia on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and I had transferred the title of my home at 4412 Cleburne Avenue into the Simone Revocable Living Trust. My mother's POA covered me as an individual. It did not cover the trust. The trust had its own separate legal identity, its own separate deed, and its own trustee. Me. And only me. With a successor trustee named in the documents who was not my mother, not my sister, and not anyone in my family. The reason I did it was not because I suspected my mother of anything specific. I did it because before a 7-month research deployment to a communication-restricted zone, my attorney told me to. She said, and I remember this exactly, "A general POA in the hands of anyone who might have competing financial interests is an open door. The trust is a lock." I ordered a coffee I didn't taste. I read back through my documents on my phone. I confirmed everything was in order. Then I paid the tab, and I went back to my house. The buyer was already there when I arrived. She was standing in the front yard talking to Audrey, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the brisk, assessing energy of someone who has bought and sold a lot of property. Her name was Helen. She had the kind of handshake that tells you she once worked in a room where handshakes were currency. She looked at me the way people look at unexpected variables. "And you are?" "I'm the homeowner," I said. Audrey stepped forward. "She's my sister. She's been out of the country. I'm the title holder," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "Or rather, my trust is. Would you like to come inside for a moment? There's something you should see before you transfer any funds." Helen looked from me to Audrey. Audrey's expression had curdled. "Simone, don't do this. You're gonna embarrass yourself." "I don't think I am," I said. Inside, my mother was still at the kitchen table. The photographer had packed up and left. I sat down across from Helen and I set my phone on the table, open to the document I'd pulled up at the coffee shop. The certified copy of the trust deed, filed with the county recorder's office, dated and stamped and absolutely unambiguous. "My mother holds a general power of attorney for me as an individual," I said, walking Helen through it with the same measured tone I use in grant presentations. "She can make certain financial and medical decisions on my behalf. What she cannot do is transfer assets held in a trust, because those assets don't belong to me as an individual. They belong to the trust, and she has no authority over the trust." Helen put her reading glasses down from her head and looked at the document. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at my mother. "Did you know about the trust?" My mother opened her mouth, closed it. She signed those sale documents, Audrey said from the doorway. She had the POA, it's legal. The POA covers her as an individual, I repeated. The deed that was presented to you is not a valid deed. This property does not belong to Simone the individual. It belongs to the Simone Revocable Living Trust, and my mother has no authority to sell it, which means whatever documents you signed are based on a fraudulent misrepresentation of ownership. The word fraudulent landed in the room like a stone in still water. Helen set the document down. She picked up her phone and called someone, her attorney, I think, from the speed of the conversation and the terminology. She walked out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway, speaking in a low voice. I sat quietly at my kitchen table in my saltwater-smelling clothes, and I waited. My mother was looking at the quilt, which I'd set on the counter. I needed to help her, she said finally. Not to me exactly. More to the room. I know, I said. You're never here. I was always coming back. She didn't respond to that. Helen came back into the kitchen. Her face had changed. The business composure was still there, but underneath it was something cold and purposeful. The wire has not cleared yet, she said. I'm putting a stop on it now. She turned to my mother. The documents you signed, that's a misrepresentation of ownership. I'm going to need to speak with my attorney about the appropriate next steps. That may include a fraud report. Audrey made a sound like she'd been punctured. It was a mistake. We didn't know about the trust. You had an attorney prepare sale documents on a property you didn't own, Helen said without raising her voice. That's not a mistake. That's forgery. Mom didn't know about the trust, Audrey said, and her voice had shifted out of offense and into something desperate, a frequency I recognized from our childhood, the one that usually worked. She genuinely thought she had the authority. It was a miscommunication. Audrey, I said. She looked at me. Stop talking, I said. She stopped. Whether from shock or something else, I don't know, but she stopped. Helen shook my hand, firmly, in the way of someone who has decided something, and left. I heard her on the phone again before she even reached her car. My mother sat at the table with her hands folded and her eyes down, and for a long time no one said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went by. How much does Audrey owe? I asked. My mother looked up. What? How much does Audrey owe? I asked. My mother looked up. What? Total. 38,000, she said. Credit cards. A personal loan she took out last spring. Some back rent. $38,000, not $410,000. 38. I sat with that number for a moment, thinking about my grandmother's quilt spilling out of a moving box on a February morning, about 3 years of sardines and rice and hazard pay, about a hydrangea bush along the side fence that nobody had watered in 7 months. She could have asked me, I said. You were unreachable. I had a satellite window every Thursday. For 30 minutes, she knew that. My mother didn't answer. I stood up and started making coffee. Not because I wanted any, but because I needed something to do with my hands, some small domestic motion that would slow the thing coiling in my chest down to a manageable speed. I found the coffee where I'd left it. The mugs were where I'd left them. The house was, underneath the violation of it, still mine. I didn't hear Audrey come back inside. I heard her voice first. And something had shifted in it again, out of desperation and into something flat and deliberate. The house is going to be hard to sell now anyway, she said. After today, Helen will talk, buyers talk. I know some people at the county assessor's office. She paused. I could make it very complicated for you to refinance, or to sell it yourself when the time comes. Property disputes have a way of sitting on a title for a long time. I turned around. She was holding her phone and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the screen, the way someone does when they want you to know they're not scared of you. I'm just saying, she said. There are ways to make this difficult. For everyone, unless we find a solution that works. I looked at my sister for a long moment. I thought about the 7 months I'd spent on a ship in the Bering Sea, in 20-foot swells, eating meals in a galley with 16 other people, and sleeping in a bunk the size of a coffin. I thought about the Thursday satellite windows, checking my bank balance and my mortgage confirmation and the automated alerts I'd set up on every account, every document, every property record, because I had learned early in my career that when you're unreachable, You have to build systems that are reachable for you. One of those systems was a property alert. Any change to a title record? Any filing associated with my address? I got an email. The day my mother filed the sale paperwork, I got an email. I was in the middle of the Bering Sea with 30 minutes of satellite time, and I spent 20 of them on the phone with Patricia, my state attorney. Patricia had already filed an injunction with the county recorder's office that afternoon. The sale had already been flagged before Helen ever walked through the door. I hadn't come home to stop something. I'd come home to watch something that was already stopped unfold. Audrey, I said, I need you to think very carefully before you finish that sentence. Because I have an estate attorney who filed an injunction on this property 4 months ago. I have documentation of every attempt to access trust assets without authority. I have the emails. I have the timestamps. I paused. And what you just described, filing false information with a county office to interfere with a property title, that's a felony. The flat look on her face cracked. I wasn't, she started. I'm not going to call the police, I said. That's not what I want. What I want is for you to sit down. She sat. Slowly, the way people sit when the floor is turned uncertain under them. My mother hadn't moved. I poured 3 mugs of coffee because some habits are structural, and I sat back down at the kitchen table across from the 2 people who had tried to dismantle the one fixed point I had on this earth, and I told them exactly what was going to happen next. Audrey was going to get a real financial assessment. Not from me, not from our mother, but from a nonprofit credit counseling service that I was going to find and pay for myself. $38,000 is a number that can be addressed. It is not a number that requires selling someone's house. It requires a repayment plan and some hard choices and probably a year of discomfort, which is survivable. My mother was going to see an attorney, not to face charges, but to understand, formally and in writing, what a power of attorney actually means and does not mean. Because I genuinely believe she didn't fully understand what she was signing. I believe she told herself she was helping. I believe she believed the story she constructed where this was a reasonable thing to do. People are extraordinary at that, constructing stories where they are the ones being reasonable. It is one of the most human things there is, and it is almost always the thing that causes the most damage. I told them both that I was not going to walk away from them. That was not on the table. But I was also not going to pretend that what happened here was a misunderstanding, or an accident, or grief, or any of the other soft words people use to describe the deliberate choice to take something that isn't theirs. Audrey cried. I let her. My mother looked out the kitchen window at the backyard for a long time. Then she said, I thought you'd be relieved not to have to deal with it. The house, the upkeep. I told myself you'd be relieved. I know, I said. Was that really just something I told myself? Yes, I said. Was that really just something I told myself? Yes, I said. I think so. She nodded once and went back to looking out the window. Helen did not file a fraud report. She called me directly 2 days later, which I thought was professional of her, and said she'd decided not to pursue it given that she hadn't actually lost any money, the wire having been stopped in time. She did say that she would not be doing business with my mother or sister again, which struck me as fair. My mother's POA was formally revoked the following week. Patricia handled it in about 40 minutes. Audrey started the credit counseling program the week after that. She called me from the parking lot of her first appointment, which I did not expect, and told me the counselor had said her situation was very manageable. She sounded surprised by this. I was not. The real estate photographer, as it turned out, had left a business card on the counter. I used it. I hired him to photograph the house for a different reason. I'm having it listed this spring as a short-term rental while I'm on my next deployment. Keeps it active, covers the mortgage, and a little more. Patricia reviewed the rental agreement. The hydrangea bush did not survive the winter. I planted a new one. I don't know how to explain what it feels like to walk back into a house that someone tried to take from you and find that it is still exactly and entirely yours, that the locks work, that the floors you sanded still hold, that the quilt your grandmother made is folded on the counter where you left it, a little crumpled from a box but intact. I stood in the middle of my kitchen the night after all of it alone, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, mostly, and then, underneath that, something I had to sit very still to identify. Safe. I felt safe. Which is the only thing I ever wanted from that house in the first place. If you've ever built something with your own hands and had someone tell you it was never really yours to begin with, you already know why that word matters. Share this. I've thought a lot about what Audrey said to me the day I came home. Not the threat at the end. That part I'd prepared for in the abstract way you prepare for bad weather when you've spent enough time at sea. What I keep coming back to is the first thing she said when she turned around and saw me standing in my own kitchen. "You're early." Not "I'm sorry." Not even the fake version of sorry that people offer when they've been caught. Just, "You're early." Like the problem was my timing. I used to think that what my mother and sister did was about money. $38,000 is a real number. It causes real stress. I don't want to minimize that. But the more I sit with it, the more I think the money was just the justification they reached for. The actual thing, the thing underneath, was that they had decided, somewhere along the way, that my stability was available to them. That because I was gone, because I was far away and unreachable and living a life they didn't entirely understand, what I had built wasn't really mine and the way that mattered. It was just there, unattended. Fair game. That is a story people tell themselves when they want something that belongs to someone else. They edit the owner out of the picture. They make the thing an orphan in their minds so they don't have to feel the weight of what they're doing. What I know now, sitting in this kitchen with the new hydrangea in the ground and the floors I refinished still holding, is that the trust deed I filed 8 days before I boarded that ship was not just a legal document. It was a record of the kind of person I had decided to be. Someone who plans. Someone who does the quiet, unglamorous work before the crisis, not during it. Patricia told me to file it, and I did. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because I had learned through years of field work, through equipment failures in the middle of the ocean, through a dozen situations where preparation was the only thing standing between a bad outcome and the catastrophic one, that the time to build the lock is before someone tries the door. Audrey didn't become a different person because I had that document. She's still working through the same patterns, the same ways of approaching the world that led her to a credit counselor's parking lot at 40 years old. Surprised to learn her situation was manageable. My mother is still my mother. Still the woman who tells herself she's helping when she's really just avoiding the harder conversation about what Audrey actually needs. Those things don't change because I protected myself. What changed is what they were able to do with those patterns. The trust didn't fix my family. It just meant their choices landed on them instead of on me. I think that's what people miss when they talk about protecting yourself from the people you love. It feels like a betrayal of closeness. Like you're admitting you don't trust them. But I trusted my mother with my POA. What I didn't do was leave myself entirely dependent on her judgment. Those are different things. One is about relationship. The other is about structure. You can love someone and still build a structure that doesn't require them to be perfect. You can hope for the best and still prepare for the rest. Simone, the version of me who came home to that open door on a February morning, was tired and salt-worn and completely unprepared for the particular grief of being treated like an inventory item by her own family. But she was not unprepared for the legal reality of what they tried to do. And that one thing, that one quiet act of planning, 8 days before departure, 40 minutes in a downtown office, is the reason I'm still writing this from my kitchen table. Build the thing before you need it. That's all. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require you to assume the worst about everyone you love. It just requires you to take yourself seriously enough to protect what you've built.